Today we'll be talking about qualifications of leaders. And probably if there's one thing that's going to make or break your groups and your program, it's going to be the quality of your leaders and the zeal of your leaders for this particular thing. One church that I was in, this is what they used to say. They used to say, find somebody that has a passion for it. Put them in charge and it will work. See, what doesn't work? Just finding somebody in their church. Well, we want to get this program going. Let's find this elder over here and let's put him in charge. Right? That's not what really works when you're dealing with groups. People know, especially when you're getting down and you're opening up and you're dealing with people, people can tell whether you really care for them. People can tell if this is your thing and you have a zeal for this and this is the all-consuming thing that you have in your life. And of course, those are the kind of leaders they want. And they want leaders also that have some experience, that have gone through some things and can sort of know things, although that isn't really required. Many times we have leaders that, some of our, as an example, some of our leaders in drug alcohol, they didn't have the problem that some of their kids did. So they have a connection, but they didn't have that particular problem themselves. You don't absolutely have to have that experience, but you're going to have a good book then, or you're going to have to know something about the subject to really get into it. Let's sort of look at that and break down things a little bit. Okay, the first thing we want to look at is the qualifications of a coordinator. Now, what's the coordinator? I'll read you sort of a job description of the coordinator here. But the coordinator is the overall person in charge of your support group ministry in the church. It might be a pastor, it might be an elder. The suggestion, of course, is that somebody who has connections with the pastor and so on, so you're going to end up in one of those appendage type of situations we talked about earlier, where you're going to last as long as the leader, and after that it's going to be over. That type of thing. Some of the job description. First, their job is to select the group, growth group leaders and support group facilitators with the input from the pastor. The other one's going to have to recruit the people. Participate in training the leaders and facilitators. So because of that, what are we going to need? Somebody that has some experience, at least led some groups before, or at least knows what groups are all about, and knows how to handle things that happen in groups. Lead the ongoing training and develop the leaders and facilitators. Can't just sort of do it and send somebody off and not do anything with them and not talk to them and not see how things are going. You have to at least provide a certain amount of supervision. Participate in problem solving. Shepherd and encourage the leaders and facilitators. One of the ideas in churches today, have you ever heard the government of 12? Ever heard that idea? One particular pastor came up with the idea, just like Jesus, the way he has his mega church organized is that he has 12 elders under him. He spends his time primarily with those 12 elders, and then those 12 elders each have people under them, and they spend time with them, and they have people under them, and so on and so forth, until everybody's covered and taken care of. And the idea is the same thing. The people you have as your leaders, if you're the group coordinator, it's your job to have a relationship with them. It's your job to work with them, to maybe sit down in the group, see how you can help them improve, or at least provide a certain amount of supervision for them. Because you're the one that sort of pulls it all together. And if they have problems, what's your job? To try and help them come up with ideas, not for you to go in and do it necessarily, but for you to come up with ideas of how to solve those problems. Shepherding and encourage the leaders and facilitators. If they have problems in their family, other stuff like that, you need to get to know them. Serve as an example of love, faith, strength, and prayer. Who are they going to be looking for? I mean, looking to you to see how you do it. They say you should be able to run a group. Many times if you go in there and run the group, you can show them how to do it. Serve as a liaison to the pastor for the small group ministry. Be better if you were on a board or if you're an associate pastor or something like that at this particular level. Arrange for referrals for those group participants who may need more help than the group can provide. So wouldn't it be nice if you were a counselor or something like that, or at least had some teaching in that particular area, so you have individual problems, you know how to relate to them and deal with them. Like if you're the coordinator, guess who's probably going to get called if somebody's suicidal in the group? And you better know how to handle that, or because we're not necessarily saying all the group leaders have to have that level of training. We're not expecting all the group leaders necessarily to be counselors or have degrees and so on, although we use quite a few counselors here to see that happen. So you see in the picture. Okay, that's the coordinator. Now, what are the qualifications of the coordinator? First, has to have a passion for groups. If he doesn't, this probably is not going to go very far. Now here's one that's really a big one. Not a stepping stone to another ministry or for having his own church. Why? What's one of the real dangers of groups in a church? Yeah, split. And so if he has a plan at some point to have his own church, he's developing all these relationships with all these people, right? And if he leaves, what's probably going to happen? A chunk of that church is going to end up leaving with him, and you end up with a church split, even if you didn't want to. And it's always a problem when you have associate pastors, everything else in a church. You want to have the people that this is their ministry, this is their calling. They're just not doing this to make relationships, and then they're going to move on someplace else and probably take that group of people with them. What's going to happen to the group ministry if that's what happens? The group ministry is going to move from here to there, or at least part of it. It's going to split. There's going to be all sorts of conflict and problems. Good relationship skills. Good organizational skills. A servant, not a controller. Deep compassion for people. You got to care. Can accept everyone as they are, not judgmental. I think some of these things are pretty obvious, right? Of why that would be the case and why we need people like that to be running it. Because remember, whatever the top person does, ever heard the saying? Like if the parent goes from A to B, the kids go from A to D. You know, whatever problems the leader has, that's going to filter down into everybody else and be even bigger problems than we may have before. Spiritually and psychologically healthy. Has solid victory in his or her life. If they came out of drugs and alcohol or came out of some other area, they're going to have had that together. If they're solid and you're not going to relapse halfway through the year or something like that. And what we suggest is they need the same qualifications that a bishop or an elder has in a church. This is a ministry like that of a pastor. So let's read some of the verses about that and it'll make it real clear. 1 Timothy 3:2. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, vigilant, sober, of good behavior, given to hospitality, apt to teach. Okay, just take that piece of it. What do we say? Here's a person that gets along with people. You know, they're not dysfunctional in some huge way. And they like to have people around, and they're just a good person, right? Next line here, next verse. Verse 3. Not given to wine, no striker, not greedy of filthy lucre, but patient, not a brawler, not covetousness. You don't want to have people trying to run this whole ministry and have some of the major problems that you're ministering to in the groups themselves. One that ruleth well his own house, having his children in subjection with all gravity. For if a man know not how to rule his own house, how shall he take care of the church of God? So if their house is in disarray, if their wife hates their guts, if they're, those kind of problems, and that says, hey, get that stuff straightened out first before you try to be a coordinator and run and build this kind of a ministry. Now, it doesn't mean later on we're talking about qualifications for leaders for individual groups, and they're not going to be as stringent as for the overall coordinator. Not a novice, lest being lifted up with pride he fall into the condemnation of the devil. What's the problem? You take somebody that hasn't done very much and they're just a new Christian or something, and they want to run, like a puppy dog running all over the place. They got all this enthusiasm, but what happens? They haven't learned about their own mistakes yet. So they're going to make a lot of mistakes before they get there, and you're going to get to learn by what they don't know. I can remember one particular situation where a pastor put a lady who got her master's degree in education but hadn't had any experience in charge of the school. What do you think happened? We got to reinvent, the wheel, and they got to make all the mistakes that everybody else has made before, and they got to make them all over again. And that's what you don't want in a deal like this. Moreover, he must have a good report of them that without, lest he fall into reproach and a snare of the devil. Now, Titus 1:7 is similar to that. They both apply to the bishop. For the bishop must be blameless, the steward of God, not self-willed. What's the not self-willed bit? That wasn't in the other one. It was that they aren't saying, this is the way it is, it's my way or the highway. In groups, how do you want to operate? Let's all work together. We're all here. We're just trying to help you have a platform here to help other people, and let's all work together, not this is the way it is and it's going to be my way and you don't act or you don't run your group like I want you to. In fact, the truth is, in leading groups, if you haven't figured it out by now, everybody has their own style and their own way. If it works and people get help, that's fine. Not soon angry. Do you think you're going to run into some dysfunctional people in groups? Do you think they might torque you off a little bit? Not given to wine. No striker. Not given to filthy lucre. But a lover of hospitality, a lover of good men, sober, just, holy, temperate. Holding fast the faithful word that has been taught. Would it be good if the overall coordinator knew what the Bible said and could teach it and could see false doctrine coming in? Because you're going to have all sorts of people walking off the street from cults and everything else. They're going to try to bring things into groups. You need somebody that knows Christianity and what the Bible says and have that solid platform so things don't run awry. Holding fast the faithful word that he hath been taught, that he may be able by sound doctrine both to exhort and to convince the gainsayers. If you've got a cult person in there and they're doing stuff, see, if you're the coordinator, if your group leader isn't really qualified to do this, guess what you need to do? Sit in that group next time. Help them get a little bit of, straighten a few things out. And be able to convince the gainsayers, as that said. So do you see, this is that job of the coordinator is a very responsible job. And of course what we would hope is what? You start out, you find somebody that can meet those qualifications, and then you grow up some of your support group leaders or your group leaders to the qualifications of a coordinator. And they can start a whole nother program. And of course it'd be better to have a backup coordinator, wouldn't it? Or at least one of your group leaders that pretty much meets these kind of requirements. How about the leader or facilitator? What's their job description like? What do you think they need to be able to do? How about facilitate the group? That'd be very nice. And to lead the group. And to be able to draw them out. And not dominate the group. And not control the group. Because if we're going to get to that working stage that we've talked about before, you've got to get the people involved in working. It isn't just some place that you give a lecture. It isn't some place that you try to control these people and what's going on. Qualifications: reasonable spiritual maturity, qualified, competent, teachable. Notice the teachable part. Do you think that's ever a problem? I know what I'm doing. I got my group. What are you doing visiting my group? You're not going to tell me what to do. That can happen. Faithful under spiritual authority again. That they're going to do it even if they say, don't like that. I'll give you an example. When we first started groups here at this church, we had them on Thursday night. And that worked very well, except we had some struggle with daycare for people who brought their kids, and that kind of thing. And we actually built up quite a few support groups. And the pastor decided, it'd be a lot easier for the church if you moved it to Wednesday. Because you already have daycare provided, Sunday school and so on for the kids. Well, what do you think I should do? I should do as the coordinator in this church for the support groups. What do you think I ought to do? Accommodate. Try and do the best I can. Realizing what? We're probably going to lose some people. Remember we said about support groups, anytime you make changes? So I need to go to the pastor and say, hey, we're probably going to lose some people about this, but if you feel this is the overall thing, because this is biblical, he has a right to run his church like he wants to, right? I need to be under authority. And just realize we might lose a few people, but hey, we'll do it. We did. We've been doing that ever since, and it worked out pretty good. In fact, they then added a bunch of other types of groups to go along with the support groups in the church on Wednesday nights. Instead of a whole group ministry just on Wednesday nights now. But see, I could have given all the reasons. Maybe I put it on Thursday for a reason, you understand? But no, I'm under spiritual authority, and I've got to be faithful. Another thing about faithful is, be nice if he showed up. Be nice if he's taking care of business and gets all the stuff done, and whatever happens gets resolved. A burden and a desire to help people. Probably this is the biggest thing about the leader. I will take a leader of a support group that has a burden for it and cares, even if they have no counseling background, even if maybe, they have some interesting ideas or other stuff like that. But I'll take that zeal over knowledge. Now I'll make sure that I require them to go through a book and go chapter by chapter so they can study it and stay one step ahead of the people. But I'll always take that zeal, that person that really cares for people. Because remember, especially in support groups, half the support group is the support, the people caring. I'll take that any day over a person that has a lot of head knowledge that just wants to go in there and show everybody how smart he is. Previous experience in leading groups is definitely desirable. That's why we like to bring people in, give you some group experience. That's why we're doing that in this class, is give you some group experience. So later on, you're going to, at least some of you will get a chance to lead as part of our group or something as we get into the working stage. Called by God. Not a stepping stone again. Experience in the recovery process. In Rafa, we're using some of the materials here in this group, are going to give us a list of what they think the experience should be for a group leader. And I'm going to read you some of that because of the interesting ideas that they have. And qualifications of a deacon. Let's look at the qualifications of a deacon now in the Bible. 1 Timothy 3:8. Likewise, must the deacon be grave, not double-tongued. Why do you think it says that? And why do you think we apply that? What if your leader is gossiping? And not good, especially in support group. Not given to much wine. What if you have a drug alcohol group and they see the leader in the bar, half drunk? Not greedy of filthy lucre. Holding the mystery of the faith in a pure conscience. Even if they've had problems. You see what that's saying? Even if they had problems, they're forgiven. They're living for God, and so on. And let these also first be proved. Then let them use the office of a deacon, being found blameless. What does that mean? Try to put people in as an assistant leader for a while before you make them a leader of a group all by themselves. Even so must their wives be grave, not slanderous. Why do you think that is? Again, they're struggling in their family, we've got a problem, but if their wife hears anything and she's slandering everyone, that person in the group, sober, faithful in all things. Let the deacons be the husband of one wife, ruling their children and their own house well. For they that have used the office of a deacon well purchase to themselves a good degree and great boldness in the faith which is in Jesus Christ. So, did you get the picture? So now what I want to do is I want to give you some examples of situations of leaders that turned out good and did not turn out good, and so on, to sort of give you a flavor of sort of what we have at least learned over the last 10, 15 years. The first one is, and we mentioned it in here before, somebody that is looking to eventually have their own church. Particular situation, came into the church as an associate pastor, and they're the real people person. You know what I mean? Of course, what do you think they did? They gathered a lot of other people that really like to have relationships and all that, and so they ended up having groups, in the church that were relationship oriented. But what do you think this guy didn't like about the senior pastor? Felt the senior pastor didn't spend enough time with people. So you usually see it from your own idea, right? And eventually got in heck with the senior pastor, split the church, and took all that he saw, the people, type of people that he made relations with, took them all and started another church down the road. What do you think of that? It's one of the dangers here, and that's why some pastors have a hard time having groups in the church. That's why if you're doing this, you need to head that off and get an idea where people are coming from. If they really, their vision is they want to have their own church, at least set some good boundaries and some good lines here that this is not. In fact, you don't take people from here. In fact, that's totally unethical, and God's not going to bless you if you go try and start a church that way or start your own ministry that way. You start your own counseling center that way by taking other people, clients away or support groups away for yourself. A lady who came to this church as a codependent, a lot of struggling and stuff, but she's been consistent. Been over 10 years now. And still leading the same group. Does she have a lot of knowledge beside the books? Well, her books are so worn out, they're all falling apart because she's got into them so much, but she isn't a trained counselor in any way, but she loves people and has a zeal for this particular area. You think she'd be a good leader? Yeah. Now there are people who said, well, she doesn't really know that much. Well, we make sure to use the book and go through that. Lady who came out of a very rough life, now that she's saved, in fact, she got saved in our support groups. In fact, the way she comes to this church now is she had to walk through the sanctuary to get to where the support group met. And eventually, over a significant period of time, came. But she doesn't have a lot of training or anything like that, except she has a lot of experience of how not to do things. And a lot of experience of what it's like to be totally addicted, and that she had her first baby in prison. But do you think she'll make a good support group leader? Yeah, wonderful. Because she knows and she can talk to the other people in the group from knowledge, and she's totally delivered and totally free and loves Jesus, and people get saved. People like that can make good leaders. How about somebody that has a degree in counseling? Yeah, they can, but they still have to have that zeal. They still have to really care about those people and what's going on. Another one, different church, but rough. I mean, this guy is, he could join any gang and fit right in. He could ride the motorcycles. He could, you know what I mean? In this particular church, and he doesn't do it like we would normally do support groups here. They almost don't believe in counseling or anything like that. But he has a huge ministry to people coming out of jails. And his support groups they're not really run sort of like support groups. They're more preaching and relationships and that kind of stuff. But he's, you know, helped 50 people show up. He doesn't do it like we would say. He doesn't follow the rules very much. But he gets people saved, he gets them delivered, and they get helped. And they live for God. I'm saying you have to be a little bit flexible. Just because someone is not like the standard little thing, you know, that doesn't mean they're not going to be able to minister and really help people. Last example. A Bible teacher who divorced his wife for another woman. His whole life fell apart. Now, many years later, guess what he's doing? Has a support group for divorced people. Had 120 people come into his ministry. Because although he blew it, do you see what I'm saying? You don't have to have people, you have to have people now that learn from their mistakes, but you don't have to have people that have always done things right to run support groups. It's the caring, it's the unconditional love, it's the being there for people that really makes a difference. And so there can be a wide variety of different leaders that will be very successful. As I said, the biggest thing is the passion. The biggest thing is the caring, and then some sort of a solid basis so they're not splitting groups, they're not causing division, they're not destroying the thing. And you have to really think about that when you pick your leaders, because that's going to make the big difference. Also nice if they were faithful, like you didn't have to keep changing leaders every couple months. That'd be a very nice thing to have. And so the question I have for you, do you qualify? This is what God's calling you to do. One last thing I wanted to cover that I said I was going to cover, so let's cover that. Rafa's recommendation for how much recovery you need to do certain kinds of support groups. They recommend chemical dependency, 2 years of sobriety, and 2 years of group experience. I don't think we use, these aren't as high, we probably will use people that are sooner than this, but I'm saying this is their recommendations. Eating disorders group. They even recommend that you split up anorexia, bulimia, and compulsive overeating. But again, 2 years recovery, 2 years of group experience. Codependency. 2 years recovery, 1 year of group experience. Grief support groups. 1 year of recovery, 1 year of group experience. Divorce recovery. 2 years and 1 year. And here's the interesting thing. Okay, their recommendation, because they feel the pain is so great here, sexual abuse support groups. A master's degree in counseling with specialty in sexual abuse. And the same thing, sexual addiction support groups. Master's degree in counseling with specialty in working with sexually abused people. We don't really follow that if the person has good recovery. Do you see what I'm saying? But they're saying because these are such serious things, and you need to know what you're doing. Because we use good books and so on that will help that kind of thing, and then we provide good supervision of people that do have those kind of qualifications. But the idea is you have to think that through if you're going to be a group coordinator or even a group leader. How about qualifications of people to come to your group? We haven't talked about that, have we? What do you think the qualifications should be of people coming to your group? They should be alive. That's a useful thing. But also there are going to be certain people that maybe you won't be able to deal with if they have severe mental illness. Sometimes people we've had that came that had severe mental illness, at some point, they usually left on their own, but I'm just saying at some point we had to take them aside and say, we think you need more than what this group can provide. We'll give you individual counseling, or we'll get you with a counselor and so on to really help you. Or maybe at least have a counselor working with them at the side. And the real question is, are they disrupting the group or are they helping the group? Are they going to be part of this core that comes together to form this group? Are they going to be tearing your group up? You have to have good boundaries, and sometimes there are some people that are just not going to fit in. Many times we'll say, hey, looks like you're just not fitting in with this group, how about try this other group? But we'll warn the leader, watch, see what's going on here. And of course, we work with people to the degree we can. We're very seldom do we'd ask somebody to leave or something like that, or set some boundaries where they have to choose. But sometimes you have to if they're tearing up the whole group and nobody else can get anything out of the group because of what this person's doing. But usually our goal would then be to try and get them with a lay counselor or somebody or a professional and help them deal with their issues so they can fit in with that group and they can get help, because groups are very good and very useful. Do they have to be saved? No. You have to believe like we do? No. It's not a question, because many times they get led to the Lord by the people in the group and they learn from that. If we can help them and they're not going to disrupt the group and so on, then they're qualified to be in our groups. That's the way we sort of look at it. Doesn't mean how much dysfunction they have, doesn't mean what kind of problems they have. No, that's, we're not trying to say clean up your act and you can come to our group. No. Groups are here to help you where you are. You can express yourself. You can be yourself. But you can't hurt other people, do stuff that's destructive, or tear up the group so the group can't function. If that's the case, then we'll have to set boundaries and do something to work those kind of things through. And later on in this course, we'll go through a whole list of how to deal with all these different kind of issues that have come up. That's right. Lord, we thank you that you care enough for people. Lord, you had your 12 disciples. And Lord God, you were a good coordinator. You were a good leader. And we ask you would help each one of us to learn and to grow, to become that good leader, to have that passion, to really be able to help people, that you might be glorified and they might become all that you want them to be, in Jesus' name. Well, today our lesson is on the subject of faith. It's section 7. So what have you guys gotten out of the lesson?
Without faith, it's impossible to please God. That is so true.
Why is that true?
Because you can't please Him. If you don't believe in God, if you don't let Him show you, let Him work through you, nothing's going to work out. You might think it is, but it isn't working the way it should.
He rewards those that earnestly seek Him. It's because we have to acknowledge faith is not basically faith is basically your acknowledgement that God exists and that you or that so that He rewards. So I think it's probably two-part. If you acknowledge and exist, and then through faith you're also earnestly seeking Him, and He rewards those that earnestly seek Him.
Okay. So what is faith? I think everybody probably has their own definition. Let's go around. Let's see. What is faith?
Well, there's the biblical definition, but I was reading a Jewish Christian site on the internet, and there they had some of their teaching materials. And an interesting comment that they made was that, and I don't know how true this is, but it was interesting. It might help somebody, just come to terms with exactly what faith is. But they said that faith is probably not as good a term to use. What they were basically saying was that the word, the original Hebrew word that was being interpreted as faith, would be better interpreted as trust.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Just trust.
How about anybody else? What do you think? Okay. And you have to talk a little louder than that, they're not gonna hear you.
So, I mean, one could say this isn't mine. One could say that faith is believing in something that we can't see, but in all reality, once you get in filled with the Holy Spirit, I'm telling you, it's as real as it's as real as this book right here. So it is. It's actually trust. It's learning to put your trust in God. So for myself, once I figured out how much love God has, that I mean, it's kind of hard not to love somebody that has that much love. It's kind of a no-brainer. Once you get the concept.
So I'm hearing
It
is,
took me 50 years to get the concept.
Now you gotta start somewhere.
A lot of walls.
Yes,
A lot of walls, yeah.
what I'm hearing is that you develop trust in God when you realized how much He loved you and how much He cared for you and how much He accepted you the way you are.
Right, because God wants good for us. He's not out there trying to do bad to us. He's actually trying to do bad to himself. So, yeah.
That's actually a pretty advanced concept. There are a lot of people that's not the way they see God. They don't see God, just actually think that He actually loves you and cares for you. I thought, wasn't God this guy up in the sky with this ball peen hammer?
I used to
I thought it was just waiting for you to get out of the line and stick your thumb out. But no, I'm saying, see, what you're saying is trust really is really related to how you see the person. See, how much do I trust you? As much as I know you. As much as I know about you, or whatever. See, I don't think we have any axe murders in this group. You know, so I don't have to,
But it's also, it's a building of confidence. So it requires some experience, to start really building that confidence that you're hearing God's voice, and of course, being faithful to accomplish what He's actually called you to, or asked you to do, the instructions to follow through with it, and be faithful. Kind of some of those experiences before you start, gaining some confidence in the process.
Yeah. And of course, the point in the book isn't just introduces faith, but the point is saying that God, your faith is going to be tested. Because God is going to ask you to do something that you can't do.
But you know that He loves you, otherwise He wouldn't be asking you.
Okay.
That's right. And and like the book experience, so that the more we build a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, then the greater that trust becomes. Because the more we understand and know that God is love.
Has God ever asked you to do something that maybe stretched your faith? Because that's what it's talking about. We'd like to share.
It's trust. Like you said, faith is trust. God is not like man. You can't always trust in man because they lie and they aren't always trustworthy.
Are you saying that men do that kind of thing?
Women too. I'm man.
I thought we were getting ready to go too personal.
Human. But God told me that He specifically said to me, you can trust in me. I am not like man. You can rely on me. I love you. and I will do nothing that is going to hurt you. So believe in me, which I already believe in you.
Mhm.
But that's what he specifically said to me, and that's how I feel. I trust him, I love him, I believe in him, because he loves me, and that's what belief is to me. Faith is.
And actually, what it really shows is the faith that you have in God. Because you believe He's going to have your best interests in mind. You believe He's on your side. You believe He's not going to fail you. And because of that, you trust Him. That's what I'm really hearing. And how about the example where you were really tested? You know, let's face it. What this book is talking about is that God will, He's doing things and He will ask you to be part of that. But sometimes when He asks you to be part of it, He asks for a little bit much.
And you have to step out of faith. And that's really difficult.
Yeah.
Giving up something, doing something that isn't your normal person.
Mm-hmm.
I love their example about the finances in church.
Mm-hmm.
When setting budgets and of course you'll always, normal approach would be to accept, your historical experience, and you would get several years worth of spending, and then you would come along and start figuring, maybe modest growth. I don't know. A lot would depend on the membership role of the church, and then where specifically what the Lord was leading you to do, but you would probably set it a little bit higher than last year.
Mm-hmm.
And proceed on. And his example here was that, they didn't just set it higher, it was about 3 times as much as what,
Since
it
you're
was before.
involved in that in your church, do you think you ought to do that?
Well, I've been involved in some discussions along those lines, I think it always goes back to, well, okay, what is God calling the church to do? All right? If I'm not going to go off and say run the risk of going into debt, unless the Lord has specifically called you to go in a certain direction. And that's the thing that you usually get into when you're in a church board is, who's really hearing the voice of God, and is everybody else, going to get on board with that when maybe 1 or 2 people come up and say, the Lord told me we're supposed to triple our budget this year, and we're going to start by, reaching out in faith and doing this, this, and this, and everybody's going, if you say something, you're going to be viewed as, oh, ye of little faith, so, it's something you better be hearing the Lord's voice about. But if it is, then you need to be reached out to.
So what would be the difference? How would you know? How would you know whether you should do that in triple budget or you shouldn't triple the budget? How do you know? Well,
I think it's just like his examples on how you hear the voice of God. It's you're spending time in prayer, but you're also receiving impressions from situations, circumstances, that come up, and confirmations from others. Is what you're doing going to be something that you have to go in debt for? And if it is, then that's not very biblical. So you have maybe a tough time, proceeding along that basis. But if it was all based on, this is what we're going to do, and the Lord's going to provide the money, and then if the money doesn't come in, then we're going to have to revise His plan. Then that's, do you reach out and start borrowing money? I don't think that's.
But how do you know? How do you know if you have faith? Because we all believe that Jesus said, according to your faith, be it unto you. And so you got a little problem here. If you think you have faith and you're supposed to do it and you didn't, and it doesn't happen, then you're up a creek, right? But also, when we have faith, sometimes we're afraid to... How do you know if you have faith? How do you know if you're supposed to do something?
I think more than one person has to feel the same way. If they're going to do something on a big scale, they have to have confirmation of God. And I personally think you should always be on the positive when it comes to God. And feel positive. If you think you hear something, then feel positive and continue seeking God's voice. And you go towards the negative, you're not going to get anywhere. Negativity is not what God wants.
But is it also possible to have presumption?
Yes.
See, what is presumption? Faith in the will. But it's, you're going beyond where your faith is. And if you only have faith in your will, you don't have faith in any other place. So you're getting too far ahead of yourself. Just like mental assent is where your thinking gets ahead of yourself and the rest of you aren't there. So, what is faith? How do you...
You have to humble yourself to the Lord.
Okay.
You can't just let your pride take over.
And how do you know you really have faith? Because there's a lot of cases. I can remember one time, I had a small little church and so on, and we were trying to build faith in the people. And I sort of put myself in the spot. Somebody had something in their hand, they were going to pray for it and see it healed, right? Didn't happen. How well do you think that went over? How many of you ever prayed for something that didn't happen? Later on, you think you're thank God it didn't, huh?
Or later on, it does happen. And it just was the wrong time. You were thinking it's supposed to be right now. And God said, no, it's not right now. It'll be when I have the right time for it to happen.
Okay, but how about those faith failures? See, because what we're talking about here is if God, God tells you, you feel God's telling you to go and take something on big, go do something, and so on, and what do you do if you don't have the faith? What if you think God's telling you to do it, but you don't have the faith it's going to work?
Then you're not being a vessel that God can use.
Well, but I'm going to say, this is the reality. I get down to the reality of stuff here.
Yeah.
Like, I can remember, it was sort of funny because God had to talk to me, because I was, the fellowship that I came out of, as a pastor, you prayed for at least an hour a day, and so on, and the kind of thing, and I was, our little church, and I was going there every morning, and I was praying, and so on, and at one point, God just sort of spoke to me and says, do you really believe it's going to happen? So we can say a lot of stuff out of our mouths and in our prayer and so on, but the question is, do we have that expectation down inside of our spirit, not in our head, not in our emotions, not in what we want to see happen, but do we really know that we know that we know it's going to happen? See, that's how I see faith. Right? Truth is, in my life, times that I prayed for stuff, they happened sometimes, didn't happen sometimes. But every time that I knew, that I knew, that I knew, it was it got in my spirit, and my spirit knew it. It happened. And I was right exactly what I expected, but I just had this knowing. And if I followed that knowing.
Well, what happens when you're like that, but yet it's a group effort?
It's a good question.
Then how do you take it to the next level, which is I know, but how do I get everybody else to feel the same way?
Step out of faith.
Yeah.
Well, they may not want to step out over
Yeah.
that aching emptiness with nothing under their feet. Because they're not feeling that way, and you're feeling that way. So what do? Good question.
I mean, there needs to be resolution to these kinds of things, because you don't really want people sitting around thinking, well, they're not going to support me in this. They've got no faith, you know. And the other person over there going, gee, I don't want to say anything here. I don't really feel that way at all, but you know, I don't want to say anything because people think I don't have any faith.
I've seen,
You know, that happens all the time.
I've seen that same thing in a Bible study group cause a split. And
Yeah.
Split, probably a third off the church, and they went over and studied Bible based on their gung-ho faith, and the other reservists, they didn't do that. And it was a problem.
But how do you do this in a marriage as an example? Let's just take an example here and let's see how do we handle this, okay? Here you are, is this wonderful evangelist, you know, and the kids in Barfor are dying, and they show you all these pictures, and then they say, who is willing to give? Who is willing to stretch their faith, and we're going to raise this money and help all of these dying kids? Okay? You're a couple. How do you decide that? How much are you going to give in this particular offering? But how are you going to do that? Because, and especially in the case you brought up, I'm just making your case more concrete.
Sure.
You know, because you brought the deal. What if one of you says, sell a house? And the other one says,
There's some people who bought a house one time they couldn't afford, thinking they were going to, by faith, pay for it, and they ended up getting themselves in a financial mess.
yeah, because if you don't know that you know it, when you have people that are in the same situation, like in a marriage, let's see, okay, let's just say you believe that you ought to give $100 to this ministry. And you realize things are tight, and you'd be happy to give your tithe. How do you work that out?
You have to pray together. Both of you seek the same thing.
Okay, but what if you get different answers? Then what do you do?
I want to hear this answer.
Then you have to decide together.
But how? So the thing is, because that's a real reality there. And some people have more faith. In fact, a lot of couples, a lot of families, you know, do we buy that house or we don't buy that house? Do we, what are we going to do here and what we give? Are we going to, you know, and sometimes these spiritual things. How about tithing? How about the one person believes in tithing, the other one doesn't? Or the other one saying, we don't have the money. I'm sorry, I know we're supposed to do that, but we just don't have the money. We're not going to make our bills.
No, that one's not going to faith. Tithing is what you give God right off the bat. So that one's not going to work.
Okay.
That's a different example.
But we're at the offering.
Right.
I'm saying, in the
Like
offering,
the offering.
okay, how do you do it?
Well, you know, you pray, and then you...
Sit down and figure out the budget and figure out.
Remember, you have about 2 minutes to make up your mind here, because the offering bucket, you see it coming down the aisle, you down the row.
You're sitting there with your checkbook.
Now you have your checkbook in your hand.
And dropping my head.
Yeah, you know. And probably one or the other has to say...
Honestly, what would you do? If you guys just a couple, what would you do?
One of us usually says, what do you think? And then one of the others says a number, and then the other one either agrees with that number or says, I don't know, you know, or can we do a little more, or, you know.
Okay.
It's usually the way it works.
And of course, But if it really impact you greatly, that, if it's like we're talking about, what's going to be $5 or $10, we're saying that's not too bad. But then if we're going to stretch our faith, and is this going to be $100 or?
But you have to feel that, and the Lord will.
Mm-hmm.
I feel the Lord will compensate for it. He will help you make up what you have given, because you are helping the ministry, you're helping the Lord.
I think that, you do have to be a little bit careful, because some people would give their rent away,
Well, is there a time when you should give your rent away?
Well, yeah, and the Lord better speak a big old word to you in order to make that.
That's what you've got to know that you know. But see, you're right, because what we do in faith, what we believe, if it affects somebody else, do they have a right to be in that decision?
Mm-hmm.
You definitely do.
Oh, yeah.
And you guys do about what we do type of thing. We'll go in, but it goes sort of like this, well, honey, how much do you think? Gives a number. And the other person will say, if they give a different number, because we know God's, what do we say? Well, how spiritually are you feeling right now? No, because, one of you might know that it's God, and the other one, heck, you're in the flesh. They're not even close. You know you're not.
I'm thinking about lunch.
You know you're not hearing from, this isn't God at all. You're just concerned, and so on. And so usually we'll go with the one that felt the strongest, that they really heard from God.
Right.
But if not, we even will go to this point, okay? If it is something we can do right now, we'll say, okay, if you're not sure, we'll give the lowest amount, we'll pray about it, we'll give the rest this evening, in the evening service, if that's, but it has to be something that you're not bulldozing, or you're not saying, you don't have any faith? I mean, what a wimpy Christian you are. I mean, because if you really were, then you would give everything, and you would just trust God, and He would just provide, right?
You don't say that.
Well, I've heard people say very similar things to that.
Well, I've heard offerings. I know there are 10 people in this building that are going to give $10,000 each. And it's almost like, if you don't, that shows that you're not very spiritual. You didn't have enough faith, right? What do you think about that?
Thinking, well, it's probably not going to be me.
And they are also thinking, well, they could be thinking selfishly, I need this for this ministry.
Mm-hmm.
And if I speak this out, then maybe somebody will do it. And that could just be, that's not spiritual.
Yeah, how many people you know that have gone beyond their faith in something?
Yes, a lot of people have done that.
Yeah.
We've done that.
Yeah, and that can really be a big problem. I know a guy who actually had a client, and he felt that God wanted him to provide so much money to this ministry. So his solution was he expanded his business way beyond what it should have been expanded, and eventually went bankrupt. But the reason he was expanding is because he had made this faith commitment to God, so he felt he had to make it happen, and so he... What do you think of that?
He made the faith commitment out of his flesh, so that he would think that he was doing something good.
It just always raises up in me the thought that you need. That's the why you need to be in a close relationship with the Lord, and you're hearing His voice, and you're learning how to obey His voice, because there's lots of decisions to be made. If you're not hearing His voice, then you're not going to make the right decisions.